I was born from a German father and an American mother. In the Austrian elementary school that I attended, I had a teacher who told me that my father killed all the Jews, and another teacher told me that my mother killed all the Indians. I went to kindergarten in Mannheim, Germany. We children played in an abandoned street just next to the kindergarten. I remember the ruins of houses, the black streaks on burnt walls. 4-story buildings had collapsed under American bombs. My teacher were not wrong. On both sides of my family, I'm related to people who've done terrible things. In the 1940s, my father was fighting for his German Vaterland. My father did not talk much about the war. Only once, during a summer vacation in France and Italy, did he pour out his heart. For 1 hour every day, he would tell his 3 oldest children his story of the war. He was 17 when he was drafted into Hitler's army. He was one of the very few who survived the Battle of Stalingrad, where more than 650,000 German troops and 500,000 Russian soldiers were killed in a single battle. Of the 850,000 civilians who once inhabited the city, the census after the war counted only 1,500. The overall loss of life amounts to about 1.5 million to 2 million people in one single battle over the course of 6 months. Heavily wounded, my father was thrown on the back of a truck. The truck driver crossed through 2 enemy lines without being detected and attacked. As soon as he recovered from his injuries, my father was sent back to the Russian front. This time his platoon was surrounded, and the only hope for these young soldiers was to run up a hill under heavy fire. For years my father had been a devout Christian and an active youth leader. But it was then that he decided not to pursue his dream of becoming a theater director. If he survived, he prayed, he would study theology and become a minister. I will never forget how he told us about the longest night in his life, running half a mile up that hill under heavy fire. My father was the only one in the platoon to survive. For 4 weeks he walked west, traveling at night, hiding during the day, until he met with German troops again. The next time my father was sent to the front, he was sent to Italy. On Christmas Eve, an American grenade exploded close to him, sending splinters into his neck and upper arm. Until his death, 35 years later, he would pull little pieces of shrapnel out of the skin. My American uncles, about the same age as my father, were fighting for America. My father and my uncles were shooting at each other. A family divided. At that time, we were not a family, not yet. The house my wife and I had bought and lived in for 10 years in Germany before we moved to Maine was an old house, more than a century old. The sandstone walls were 2 feet thick. On the outside, there were marks from the splinters of a bomb which had detonated in the little park across the street. The splinters had done little damage to the strong walls of our house. Our neighbors, an elderly couple, told us that only 2 bombs had fallen on this particular part of Mannheim. 1 bomb had fallen in front of our house. And Jim and Debbie, when we visited it in February, I showed you those splinters, and I promised you I would tell you the significance of them for me. So 1 bomb fell in front of our house. The other bomb, I knew, had hit the home of my godmother. The house was completely destroyed. It had been a dark night. The city observed a complete blackout. My godmother's neighbor, however, had left a light on, and it was this light that had led the pilot to drop his fatal load. I'm a Lutheran, and as far back as the 16th century, my family was Lutheran. You know, if you're from Germany, you don't have that many choices. My father being clergy, I'm really happy he wasn't Catholic. My godmother is very active in the local Lutheran congregation. Now, several years ago, my wife Vera and I attended a church service here in Springfield, Missouri. We were introduced to a retired pastor who had made a fortune in the stock market. And with his money, he would buy lots in thriving suburbs and help local Lutherans to form new congregations, erect church buildings, and hire pastors. This was his ministry. When he learned that we were from Germany, he told us that he had been in Germany once before. He seemed a little hesitant at first, but then he explained. He never put his foot on German soil, but as a young man, as a soldier in an airplane, he had seen Germany from above. Their mission was to drop bombs over Mannheim. But they had problems with one of the engines, decided to turn back early, and therefore dropped their bombs on the first target they could identify, a little light. That little light led the bomb to the house of my godmother. My godmother's house collapsed in a way that the emergency crews could not get to the basement. She, her husband, her mother, and her father were buried in rubble. During that night, my godmother witnessed the slow and painful death of both her father and her husband. She could not move, lying under a heavy load of bricks with a broken hip and shoulder, but she heard every word and every cry. What is the difference between a German and an American? What is the difference between an Iraqi and an American? Or someone from Afghanistan? Or someone from Iran? I know enough of my father to see that he was not fighting in Stalingrad because he had a choice. And I know enough of my American uncles to understand that they were doing what they felt they had to do. And I know that my godmother is a good Lutheran. And the retired pastor who bombed her home is a good Lutheran as well. We all have had our experiences, and we all had to live and cope with the experiences of the generation before us. All this forms the way we think, and it forms the way we speak, and it informs the way we express God's presence in our lives. When we came to the U.S., one of the early lessons my wife, Vera, and I learned was that on this continent, God speaks English. All our lives, we had prayed to God, together with our families and friends, in German. My father grew up in former East Germany, in Leipzig, in Saxony. And the people from Saxony have a very, very strong dialect. The expressions they use, just the way they pronounce certain words, it sounds funny to other Germans. No matter what they say, just the way they say it makes us laugh. We lived in Maine for a long time, and there were certain words, they don't sell lobster there. If you think so, no, it's lobster. It's lobster. And they don't park their car; they park their car, and park their car. No? And so it was. If someone's name was Miller, you had no clue how the word really ended with an A, an AH, an ER. So you know what I'm talking about. And the people in Saxony, it's just really weird, and it makes you laugh. It sounds strange. Now, my mother was American, and the German she had learned from my father. After the wall had come down, my mother visited her husband's hometown, Leipzig, for the very first time. And what did she say when she came back? The people in Saxony are the only people in the world who speak German without an accent. We all have an accent. and the accent betrays our past. It tells those who we meet who we are and where we come from. We do not speak God's language. God speaks our language. That is why God speaks with an accent as well. God speaks with our accent. And in my case, after living in the US for 15 years now, God starts to speak English with a heavy German accent. Please pray with me. Father in heaven, open our eyes so we may see. Open our ears so we may hear. And open our hearts so we may understand. Amen.
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at reverenddray@aol.com for more information.